everyone. Welcome to the September 27th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This is the second episode of this new podcast that we're doing, where we're handicapping some upcoming races from this weekend on Saturday and Sunday. This is a complement to the TimeformUS Pacecast that we've been doing for several months now, where we do recaps of these races. So we'll try to make some predictions and then see how we do and talk about some other races this upcoming Tuesday. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at the Belmont card on Saturday, focusing on the Jockey Club Gold Cup at the Pilgrim, some stakes from Santa Anita, as well as stakes from Churchill, Monmouth, and the Oklahoma Derby at Rubbington Park at the end of the show. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've just been looking over these races, as I always do before a big weekend, and, looking forward to talk about them. I don't know that we have the greatest menu as far as betting races go, but then again, I've learned in this game that sometimes opportunities come where you least expect them as you're watching the races live. So time will tell, and always good to talk about good horses. And as we gear up toward the Breeders' Cup, the next few weeks are going to be super exciting.
Yeah, a lot of prep races, and that's resulted in a lot of heavy favorites in these races. We're not talking about as many races as I was hoping that we could talk about as among the Grade 1 races. Races like the Vosburg and the Beldame just didn't come up that interesting in terms of handicapping and wagering with heavy favorites in those races. But we will talk about the Jockey Club Gold Cup to start things off. It is a small field, but I think it's an interesting field because you've got 4 horses in this race who would be worthy winners of the Gold Cup, and they're pretty evenly matched. There's not a lot of pace in this race, so maybe we could start by talking about the TimeformUS pace projector a little bit. I see the Preservationist is predicted to be on the lead. Is that kind of how you see this setting up?
I'm really not sure. I seem to remember there was some apprehension with him taking the lead the time where he lost to McKenzie, and I think he's a horse that might like to raid off of it. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Olympic Village. I mean, I would assume he's in here as a feed filler, but with the Lutz stable, who knows? But, he's certainly a horse who could show some speed. He's shown some speed sprinting, so I don't know what the plan is with him. The real surprise to me was Tacitus, that they actually left the blinkers on again after last time. But with the makeup of this field, I can see it, and it wouldn't surprise me if he actually went to the lead from the rail. It's a little bit of a tricky gate placement when they run a mile and a quarter at Belmont. So the inside may not be a bad place to be if he's going to show some speed.
Yeah, I was surprised they left them on too, but I kind of had a similar thought process to you, where it might actually be a positive for him in this race, and I assume they were thinking that. I don't know what they're going to do with Preservationist. I've heard they say they want to target. I think he's fine on the lead. I don't think being on the lead is what got him beaten the Whitney 2-back. He just didn't seem to run his race that day. And I don't know what they're doing with Olympic Village. He's kind of the wild card in this race. I think the major storyline in the Gold Cup is the 3-year-olds that are stepping up to face the older horses. There are a pair of each of them among the main contenders. And I think they're pretty evenly matched. I've heard some people say that the older horses have the advantage in this race. I thought Code of Honor really stepped up in the Travers last time. I really can't fault that performance at all. He did get a very good trip, but he really ran his race that day. Tacitus was second best in that race, but I thought he also ran well. Arguably, that was one of his better races with the blinkers on. So I think that they're both legitimate contenders. I did end up giving the slight edge to the older horses, but I think it's pretty close.
Yeah, I think it is, but I've kind of leaned the other direction. I have the 3-year-old slightly faster on speed figures, at least when you consider the weight break that they're getting. And at this time of year, to me, that's pretty noticeable. A horse like Preservationist won the Woodward, but he only did it. He shows a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. Again, I use the weight settings on, so with that 126 pounds, it's a little lower than what we would otherwise see. Vino Rosso, he had a 122 in the Whitney. Even when he won the Santa Anita Gold Cup, he only got a 124. So I'm kind of interested to see what's going to happen with these. Like you, I think the big story is the 3-year-old stepping up, and I actually give him a little bit of an edge here. I'd probably lean towards Tacitus just because I think he may be a little better price and have a tactical advantage without there being much pace. But again, we'll see how the prices play out. I'm going by your morning line, which I have a lot of faith in, and I think you probably nailed this one. And I think Tacitus might offer the value.
Yeah, I ended up going for Vino Rosso as my top pick in this race, just because I feel like these horses are so close, in my opinion, and he will be the best price of the four of these horses. I just have always thought a mile and a quarter was his best distance, and he's only gotten a chance to do it a few times. He really ran well in the Gold Cup. That 124 Timeform US speed figure that he earned in that race, I think it puts him right in the mix. He's definitely not the fastest horse in this race, but I think you can make the argument that he just didn't run his A race in the Whitney last time. When I watched that race back, John Velasquez just having to get after him and really hustle him into the race for the entire running. He just never seemed like he was totally comfortable with his position. Going the 10 furlongs with a more gradual pace, he might be able to be into the race without having to be asked quite as much. And Todd Fletcher is taking the blinkers off, which I think is pretty interesting. And I've watched a bunch of his recent workouts without those blinkers. He hasn't been wearing them in any of those recent workouts, and he's been working in the morning way better than he has basically at any point in his career. So I'm hoping that Vino Rosso is just kind of turning a corner now at the end of his 4-year-old season. He's got to improve a little bit, but he's also probably going to be the best price of these. I think it's close, though, but I'm just going to take a shot with him.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think we both are on the same page. We don't want to take either of the shortest two prices in this field because I don't think they really have any noticeable edge over the other two. Obviously, I don't think Olympic Village has much chance, but I tend to agree with you. The top four are pretty evenly matched, so I would definitely lean towards a price if that's what you like. And, again, you just got to watch the tote and see what's offered because these races can be tricky and sometimes we get surprised.
Totally. Now, a lot of these stakes races on Saturday at Belmont didn't draw a lot to really sink your teeth into, but I don't think that's the case with the Pilgrim, the race right before the Jockey Club Gold Cup. There are some interesting things going on in this Pilgrim. There are some trips that you can watch, some horses with, I think, some speed figures that are worth talking about a little bit. I would imagine that the two horses coming out of impressive maiden victories on August 31st at Saratoga will probably vie for favoritism, those being No Word and Structure. Interesting discussion as to the difference in speed figures between these two horses, because one race came up very fast just in terms of raw time. The other race came up very slow, but pace had a lot to do with those difference in final times.
Yeah, it did. Structure got a 93, whereas No Word got a 94. And again, on final time, Structure was only an 86, but it was bumped up because of the pace was really slow. He finished the race really well. And that's one of the advantages of TimeformUS speed figures. We're not kind of pigeonholed into just forcing that final time or just trying to adjust it. You can look at our PPs and see it was a slower race overall, but we kind of boost it because of that pace and the finishing ability, which is pretty, I don't think anybody can really argue that's a pretty important factor on turf.
Totally. And when I was making the morning line for this race, I kind of was struggling a little bit because I know that Structure is a very highly regarded horse in the Chad Brown barn. I mean, that's pretty obvious. He was bet down to even money in his debut in a race where some other horses had run before. And looking at the buyer figures, which I know you don't look at that much, he only got a 60 buyer, and that's very slow in this race. But again, that's a final time number, and it's hard to really rate these first-time starters and make the number higher artificially. So I get why that decision was made, but I do think this horse is going to take some money regardless of all of that. He worked with Digital Age and company coming up to this race, and that's an older horse, and he worked well with that horse. So I just think Structure is probably a lot better than that first race indicates. And I think if another forwardly placed trip in here, he's going to be pretty tough to beat. Although I don't want to take anything away from No Word. He ran well in his debut also. Faster race. I'm not sure how strong the field was. We'll see. The interesting horse, I think, to discuss, well, interesting couple of horses, are those coming out of the With Anticipation, since that was just such an oddly run race without a lot of pace and some odd tactical decisions being made. I guess if you're going to take a horse out of that race that really had trouble, it would be Our Country, who just ran up on heels in the early going and just was a total nightmare for Manny Franco to handle.
Yeah, that was one ugly race, and that's basically the horse that I'm keying on in here. He had run a nice 101, I believe it was, TimeformUS speed figure the time before. And I'm not usually one to gravitate towards obvious bad trips that the whole world sees and probably get overbet. But for me, it's more of a combination that race just had a crazy slow pace. I mean, the horses were absolutely crawling. And when you mix in, he had some trouble at the start. He had the obvious traffic trouble where he was a little bit ranked, kind of rushed up inside there. And, I just think that race is one where you can just absolutely put a line through it, pretend it's not there. And if you do that and you look at his last race, he was really impressive. He was able to overcome a fairly slow pace that day in his maiden win, and he won very easily. Looked like a really good horse. I mean, he was 6-5 for a reason with anticipation. So he's a horse I'm willing to give another shot. And also Tuggle out of that race. He is definitely a bit more of a question mark. He hasn't really shown any ability on turf, but he was completely taken out of his game that day for some reason. I don't know why he was taken back off the pace, got involved in trouble. They actually did try to make a wide move into that. The pace was slow, and he moved just as it was quickening up. So I'm not really sure what to do with him, but if he offers any kind of price near his 8-1, I'm going to use him in my exactas and in the horizontal bets as well.
Yeah, I felt pretty much the same way about that race. My only caveat with anticipation was that I thought that was a pretty weak race going in, and I still am not sure how good those first two finishers are. So I'm not sure how much I really want to upgrade the horses that finished behind them, even though they did have trouble. I agree, Our Country's probably the horse you want out of that race because he did run so well to break his maiden 2 back. Tuggle was a difficult call for me because I did like him in the with anticipation. He has a ton of turf pedigree. I was just hoping to see him have more of a punch in the stretch. I know that rating him certainly wasn't the right thing to do given the way the race played out, but I just didn't see him show a real affinity for turf. I was hoping to see him just kind of stride out over the surface a little better, and I didn't notice that. So maybe he turns it around. Maybe he's a need a lead type horse. That's certainly possible. I just wasn't quite sure what to do with him. But yeah, those are the 3 I'd focus on. No Word, Our Country, Instructor. And I imagine one of those will probably win this race. We're going to stick on the turf and move over to Santa Anita, where they're running a couple of graded stakes race on the turf on Saturday to go along with the Awesome Again, which is the featured race on the card. We're not going to discuss that race because McKinsey's a big favorite, and I would assume that you agree with me that McKinsey's going to be pretty tough to beat in that race.
I do.
Yeah, he looks pretty good there. And we'll begin with the John Henry turf going 1.25 miles on that Santa Anita turf course. I thought this was a really wide open race, open to a lot of horses. What do you make of Acclimate, who's coming off that Del Mar handicap win where he just wired the field? Is he going to be able to do that again? I feel like this horse is a lot better than I sort of gave him credit for when he first won that San Juan Capistrano.
I'm not as big a fan of him as maybe you. I'm not sure. We'll see what you think. I don't like the turn back in distance. He's a horse who seems to be able to get clear at longer distances. On our pace projector, we have him shown in 3rd. Now, I'm not saying he can't make the lead, but if he does, I think he's going to have to work harder and run a lot quicker than he did going 1 mile and 3/8 or earlier than the year when he went 1 mile and 3/4. And I just don't think a whole lot of these California turf horses. So I obviously don't think he was beaten much. He just, they all kind of take turns beating each other. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, and then I'll kind of get into the direction I'm leaning on this race.
Yeah, I don't want to totally dismiss Acclimate. He's not the kind of horse I'm going to pick in this race because I still feel like he did get pretty favorable setups in those recent starts. I also feel like some of the horses behind him just didn't put forth their best efforts, especially last time in the Del Mar handicap when he and Oscar Dominguez just basically repeated their San Juan Capistrano result. But like you were saying, these horses just take turns beating each other, and I'm not really sure. I think the temptation is to go to a horse like United because he's the most lightly raced of all of them, and I guess he's got the most upside being a 4-year-old. I was watching his races back, though, and I know he was second to Marquise Waters in that Winningham, and he ran fine in that race, but that was a race that just sort of totally fell apart at the end, and the field just flip-flop positions from the horse that was last at the top of the stretch finished first, and vice versa, coming down to the wire. He got the job done in that weaker allowance race last time at Del Mar. He just feels kind of one pace to me. Maybe that gets it done going 1.25 mile distance. I just wish he had more of a turn of foot. I kind of just landed on Cleopatra Strike as my lukewarm choice in this race. I don't love this horse. I just felt like his return race at Del Mar last time was okay. He's got to handle the 1.25 mile distance. That's a bit of a question mark because he's done well at 1 1/8, but I'm hoping he can handle it. And I just thought his San Gabriel 2-back was arguably the best effort that any of these have put forward recently.
Yeah, we wound up. I had a feeling we were going to land on the same horse. Unfortunately, it's going to happen sometimes. But yeah, in a race like this where horses take turns beating each other, I tend to look for a horse that's kind of new to the group, and that would be him. Just because he had that layoff, he hadn't run since January, where he ran a really close second in next year's. I thought his allowance race was good. He didn't show me any reason why he wouldn't appreciate the 1.25 miles, and he's trained by Phil D'Amato, who's pretty much the king of the turf racing out there, along with Richard Baltus. So I was a little disappointed to see the 7-2 morning line. I'm not sure. I think it's a really closely grouped bunch, and I'm not sure what direction the betting's going to go. But I think he'll offer a little bit of value, and he's the one I settled on as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's a horse who's finished second a lot. He doesn't win that often. I think that's a bit of a concern, especially when these races are often decided by very small margins. But we see it the same way. He's likely to take a step forward. I think he's going to get a pretty good trip in a race that doesn't feature a ton of pace. Like you, I don't love the price. I just thought he made the most sense. The other turf race at Santa Anita is the Grade 1 Rodeo Drive, which goes 2 races later as the 9th race. And I would imagine there's going to be a substantial favorite in this race in Beau Recall. She's had a great season for Brad Cox. She's picked up a couple of Grade 2 victories in the Yellow Ribbon and the Distaff Turf Mile. Only lost to Rushing Fall in the Grade 1 Just a Game 2 back against a really good field. I think the real question here is she going to be as effective going the 1.25 mile distance? I'm a little bit skeptical.
I am as well. That's another one. I mean, let's be honest. We'll probably talk about it more on Tuesday after we know the results and the figures come back. But this is just an extremely weak Grade 1 race. I can't imagine any of these horses being considered contenders in the Breeders' Cup. So like you, I'm kind of going to lean another direction. I mean, I'm sure Beau Recall will run well, but I have question marks about the distance. The only one I really don't have questions marks for is Alicia's World, and that's just because of the distance. I don't love the horse, but her last couple running lines don't look good. But she's run well at Santa Anita. I think she'll enjoy the distance. So out of the horses she has to beat, I'm tending to lean in her direction.
That's interesting. I actually overlooked her a bit now that you mentioned it. She's actually run okay in some of these races. Her races in the Santa Ana and the Gamely at Santa Anita were actually pretty good. I could definitely use her. I ended up picking Paved, who's probably going to be the second choice in this race. I haven't loved either of her races this year, but I thought she was running on okay at the end of that John C. Maybe last time. She just feels like a horse to me who does want every part of that 1.25 mile distance. And she ran well in this race last year, closing to be second by just a half length to Basilica. Beau Recall also was in that race last year, and she was actually losing ground in the final 1/8 of a mile, which really makes me concerned about her going a 1.25 mile distance. If she couldn't do it in this race last year, I guess she's better now, but she just didn't have that same late kick in that 1.25 mile race, whereas Paved did, and Paved is just making her third start off the layoff now. She's got a right to be a little bit fitter, a little bit sharper, and just hoping she gets a good trip from the outside post because she doesn't have a lot of speed, as most of these don't. So I think rides and trips are going to make a big difference. I'm just hoping she doesn't have too much ground to make up in the stretch of this race.
Yeah, I don't have any problem. My only concern with Pave was the price. I saw the 5-2 morning line, but for example, if you put her next to Excellent Sunset, who I don't think wants any parts of a 1.25 miles, who is only 7-2 on the morning line, I'd put her well above that horse. So, again, not a great race, just looking for a little value. And I think between the three we talked about, you almost are sure to have the winner. I'm kind of overlooking the one. It's trained by Phil D'Amato, Mirth, I believe it is. But I just don't think she's good enough. I respect him as a trainer, but she's several lengths below these. And, so I'm going to focus on those that we talked about in horizontals and probably lean on Alicia's World in the top spot.
Yeah, looking at this race, I kind of felt like this could be a spot where Beau Recall is 4 to 5 or even money, because just in terms of accomplishments, she is head and shoulders above this group, and there's really not a lot of competition for her. So I think you were alluding to that. I kind of felt like she'd be a much shorter price in this race. I also tried to make Mirth. She was in a race that collapsed last time, and that stakes at Del Mar. I just don't see the races that make her good enough. So she'll probably lead these for a long way. I'm not sure she can see it out and actually win the race. We'll move on to Sunday to the Grade 2 Zenyatta Stakes, which is one of the features on that Sunday card at Santa Anita. And an interesting group. Another one of these divisions where these horses just seem to take turns beating each other. I guess there were three main players in this race: Secret Spice, Ollie's Candy, and Paradise Woods. It'll be interesting, I think, to see how the trips and pace play out, because that's going to make a big difference, especially for Paradise Woods, who does seem like she's best when she can be in the clear and out on the lead.
Yeah, she does. I have a lot of concern about Paradise Woods. She had a couple decent races this year. She obviously won the Santa Margarita by 10 lengths with a pretty big figure. But what I don't like, the last couple starts, she just seems to be that older mare who seems to be losing her early speed. And it would be one thing if there wasn't any other speed in this race, but Ollie's Candy showed she is definitely a quick filly. She handles dirt. She's only run on it twice, but she's won both times she has. She set a fast pace last time, and she dug in and was able to hold off Secret Spice despite even getting past a little bit late. So of the three we talked about, I'm really not a fan of Paradise Woods. She'd be the one I'm against. Of the other two, I think it could go either way. It may just depend on how much speed Paradise Woods shows and how much he's able to pressure Ollie's Candy, because I think if that one gets free, she's going to be really tough to run down. And Secret Spice hasn't shown a huge affinity for winning here lately, especially when it gets close in the stretch. So I tend to side with Ollie's Candy, but I could go either way with those two. Just depends how the tote board turns out.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where I would probably use all three in equal strength, especially if I was playing a multi-race sequence. I just have a lot of trouble separating these horses. And we should also mention this is one of these no speed situations in the pace projector, because none of these horses are really confirmed front runners. I mean, at one time Paradise Woods was, but she just has trouble getting out of the gate recently, and she doesn't have the speed that she once had. I know Ollie's Candy went to the lead last time, but that hasn't a consistent running style. Maybe they'll use those tactics again because it worked for her on dirt last time, whereas previously she had been a turf horse. Secret Spice, I guess, is the most trustworthy of the three in some ways, but I really feel like she's best going that flat mile distance, and it just seems like she hits a wall going a mile and a 16th. It happened back in the La Troyenne. It seemed like she had that Clement Hirsch in the bag last time, and then she just got really leg weary in the final 16th, and Ollie's Candy came back on her. So she's probably the most likely to run her race. I'm just not sure if she's going to get the job done going this distance. I don't want to totally discount Paradise Woods. Nothing against Mike Smith. I think Mike Smith is one of the best riders in the country, but he can be a little passive sometimes, especially on speed horses. And he kind of didn't really try that hard to get her to the lead in a couple of races he was riding her. I wonder if with this rider switch, they're going to try to be a lot more aggressive. Obviously, she's got to break because that's been an issue a couple of times recently. But if she does break, I would imagine they're going to try to hustle her to the front because that seems to be her best chance of winning this race. She does have the talent to do it, obviously, so I don't want to discount her. I also don't want to go too enthusiastically towards picking her at the expense of the others. So I just had trouble separating these. I don't have a strong opinion about this race.
Yeah, and good point about Paradise Woods with the break. I did mean to mention that she's had trouble twice in a row. Maybe the new jockey can help get her out of there a little quicker. But like I said, she's the one I'm skeptical of and hear the most of the big three. So we'll see. I'm not sure this is a very strong race. Again, as we look forward to the Breeders' Cup, this is supposed to be one of the preps. I guess at this point you can't dismiss Ollie's Candy. She hasn't lost, but if anybody else were to win, I just don't see it being a very strong race. We shall see soon enough.
Another race for the older horses of the male variety is taking place at Churchill Downs on Saturday. That's the Lucas Classic. I'm not sure I can call this a prep for the Breeders' Cup Classic because I kind of doubt that any horses are going to come out of here to run in that race, although I guess we'll see. Feels more like a prep for a race like the Clark Handicap at the end of the year. This is a pretty wide open field, though. Quip is probably the likely favorite. What do you make of Quip? He's a difficult horse for me to assess because he obviously didn't run his race in the Pacific Classic last time. He would probably win this race if he ran back to the Stephen Foster. I'm still just not sure where he really sits from a quality standpoint among these top ultra horses.
Yeah, obviously the race goes through him. If he shows up and runs his race, he's by far the most likely winner. But he was just so bad last at Pacific Classic that I have a hard time taking what's going to be a short price off of that effort. I've heard his connections interviewed. They don't really have an excuse. They're just kind of hoping that he didn't like the track or that, he just wasn't himself that day. But I'm going to against him in here. Obviously, he's the horse to beat, but I'm not going to use him at all. I'm going to look to beat him with different horses. I like Pioneer Spirit, who's just in really good form right now for Brad Cox, is running well. I like a bit of a long shot in here in Blue Ridge Tracker, who's third race off a really long layoff. Like I think it was a 15 or 16 month layoff like that. He came back in a sprint and then he won an allowance. His figures are still a little low. He only got a 106 TimeformUS speed figure, which wouldn't really make him a contender in here. But back as a 3-year-old, he had run some figures in the one teens. So with that improvement, I think he could, have a save late coming down the lane. So I'm just kind of looking for a price in what I think is a wide open field once you get past Quip.
Yeah, we have the same opinion about getting past Quip. I can't find an excuse for the last race other than the fact that it was at Del Mar, and that can be a bit of a quirky surface sometimes, especially for horses that aren't familiar with it. We saw a couple of other East Coast horses just not run well in that race, including Tenfoot, who's back in this Lucas Classic as well. Quip would be the horse to beat off his Stephen Foster two-back. The Stephen Foster was a weird race where they did not go very fast. I know it's not color-coded as a slow pace RPPs, but it's borderline. They went pretty slow for the second and third fractions. And it was also a race that featured big gaps between horses. It was a long gap from first to last. I mean, you see Tenfold ran and he was bringing up the rear, so 13 lengths behind the leaders. So I didn't think that Quip got a very good trip in the Stephen Foster and wasn't quite able to win that race. So I don't know. I'm not sure he really has as big an advantage over this field as it might seem based on that one performance. Like you, I like Pioneer Spirit as my top pick. He was right with Quip in that Oakland handicap back in April. And arguably, I think Pioneer Spirit has even stepped forward since then. I thought he was really game to win that race at Indiana Grand last time, where he sort of got passed in the stretch and came back on Silver Dust. It appears that he's been working in company with Owendale, who we'll get to in a little bit. All those bullet workouts he's been reeling off at Churchill Downs. That can't be a bad sign. And I just think he's going to get the lead from Quip in this race, and he can be really game and really tough to pass. I'd also consider Silver Dust and even Kukulkan, who has really improved lately. Kind of a surprise that he's actually been competitive against some of these U.S. horses after doing so well in Mexico, but he's really stepped up his game lately. We'll see if they handle the mile and eighth distance. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch for Silver Dust in particular, who might be more of a miling type. And I overlooked your horse a little bit, Blue Ridge Traveler. I didn't quite see it, but like you said, if Quip doesn't show up at that Stephen Foster performance, this race is totally wide open. And I mean, why can't a horse like that improve by a few points and be a contender here? So I'm not going to knock a big priced horse.
Yeah, and I'm with you. With Pioneer Spirit, I'm just assuming if Quip, I'm betting that Quip's not going to run his usual race and that he's just not the horse we saw in the Foster. And if you think that, then Pioneer Spirit looks to be alone on the lead or getting pressured by a horse who's not in top form. So he may just inherit a 2 or 3 length lead at the top of the stretch and be home free. So it's not just that he's in good form. He's been running fast races. I also think he has a bit of a tactical edge. And, if the good Quip shows up and blows it up, so I miss a short price, I can live with that.
A race that you had sent in that wasn't really on my radar previously is the Mr. Prospector Stakes at Monmouth on Saturday. It's a sprint race going 6 furlongs, the 6th race on the card for some older horses. And a really actually fascinating group because you've got horses coming in from a variety of class levels who have all been running some pretty fast races, and they're sort of converging, and you've got to make a determination as to who is really stakes quality. I guess Lasting Legacy is the horse to beat. He's kind of had an interesting career where he was very talented when he made his debut as a 3-year-old at Monmouth a couple seasons ago, had some layoffs and barn switches, but now he's back with Jason Service. His last race, which Benefactor also comes out of, was very fast. Only beat that horse by a neck, and Benefactor hadn't really shown that kind of form before, so maybe that makes you question the time of that race and the speed figure a little bit. But I think Lasting Legacy has quality, and I do think he's the horse to beat in here.
I think he is the horse to beat. I just found this race fascinating because we have just $100,000 stakes race, just a listed stakes. And there's some horses coming in with some really impressive running lines and some very fast speed figures with Lasting Legacy and Benefactor, both over the 125 mark for that last effort. I actually went in a little bit different direction. I went with Why Are You Awesome in here. If he's anywhere near that 7-2 price, he's also for Jorge Navarro, same as Benefactor. This horse was actually claimed, I think it was for $7,500 a while back, if memory serves. I know he was a claim, but I just have been watching his replays, and this horse has been winning so easily since he came back from a layoff. He showed up at Parks in June where he won. He didn't win easily that day, but the last two, he's just destroyed the field. They've proven to be really strong races, and I like that he's a horse that doesn't have to be up front. He can lay off a little bit. He did run a 124 2 starts back on our figures. He ran a 116 last time, and I don't think there's any doubt he had more in the tank if he needed it. So I'm just going to kind of go in a little bit different direction, but I just found this race fascinating for a small one. I think it's part of a series they're running at the Mid-Atlantic tracks. I don't know the whole story on that. I should have done some more research, but I'll look that up later and see it. But I guess they're actually trying to bring some of these horses together. I see Lackey's in here. He's a 3-1. Second or third choice. He's actually the second choice on the morning line. He usually runs in Maryland, so Arch Cat's coming in. So it did draw a diverse group coming from the various tracks in the Mid-Atlantic region. It's kind of a neat idea.
No, it really has drawn an interesting group of horses. The horse that you're picking, Why Are You Awesome? He was sort of the most difficult call of all of these horses for me, because I do see those pretty flashy speed figures. I'm just not sure what to make of them because they came against so much weaker company, those starter optional claiming races. Just looking through those fields, I mean, he's basically beating like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 claimers, and now he's facing some real stakes horses. I know he beat them like a drum. I don't know what to make of that. Jorge Navarro can certainly pull off some miracles, so I don't want to put anything past this horse. And he does have what's predicted to be a favorable pace situation, since the pace projectors indicating there's not a ton of real front-running speed in this race. I just found him to be a difficult horse to assess. I didn't know what to do with him in here. Benefactor, the other Jorge Navarro horse, I wasn't quite sure what to do with him either, because he's got that last race speed figure that you referenced that came out of nowhere. I will say that August 23rd card, when they ran that figure, he and Lasting Legacy at Monmouth, you see in the TimeformUS PPs, that is a day that has that dark blue color coding indicating it was a track that favored closers. And when I watched a few races that day, it did seem like that might have been one of those situations where the rail was not the place to be at Monmouth. You had a bunch of horses closing down the center of the racetrack, and Lasting Legacy was right on the rail for much of that race. So I wonder if the margin between him and Benefactor is actually a lot larger than that race makes it seem like. So based on that, maybe Lasting Legacy is even more the horse to beat than the form would indicate. The other horse I would try to get in there is Wonderful Light for Michelle Nevin. She's been trying to pick the right spots with this horse. He's running a bunch of optional claiming and allowance races, different circuits recently. He's also had a bunch of layoffs. He's had some sound issues, but he's always had ability. Maybe his recent speed figures aren't quite as fast as some of the ones he ran in the past, but I do feel like he's got the ability to compete against stakes company. They're finally targeting some real stakes with him, so maybe he can get a good stalking trip in this race and step up a little bit. He might be a bit of a price, so I'll include him along with Lasting Legacy.
Yeah, I have no problem with that horse. I imagine she probably wasn't expecting this deep of a field entering this race, these kind of fast horses, but we'll see. He could get the setup, and I just found this race fascinating. We got the two best trainers at Monmouth Park with three really hot horses that come in running fast. So I will certainly tune away from the bigger stakes at Churchill and Belmont and Santa Anita and make sure I don't miss this one.
No, it should be a fun one to watch. We'll wrap things up with the final race that'll be run this weekend, the final major race of the ones we're talking about on Sunday, the Oklahoma Derby at Remington Park, where I believe you will be on Sunday. They're running this card. I think it's like an afternoon to evening card, and I think the post time for this race is 8:24 Central Time, so a little bit later in the evening. But this race drew a great field. I mean, I was kind of surprised when I looked up the PPs, all the top 3-year-olds that are converging to run in this race, a bunch coming out of the Travers. Mucho Gusto is probably going to be the favorite after finishing third behind Code of Honor and Tacitus in the Travers. And he's got some other speed to deal with in this race, but I think getting back to the mile and an eighth as opposed to the mile and a quarter is going to make him tough to beat.
Yeah, I will definitely be there. And I'll say I go every year, and this is no doubt the strongest Oklahoma Derby field that I've seen. I can't remember back before I moved here last time how strong it's been, but this one's really good. We got multiple graded stakes winners in here. We got a couple of horses who have been sort of local horses at least. Bankett was a very close second in the Springboard Mile last year, ran here a couple times. He's trained by Steve Asmussen, as his long-range Toddy, who won that Springboard Mile and went on to win the Rebel. Taxes here, as I said, he's won a couple of grade twos, and then we have Mucho Gusto, who's won several graded stakes. So a really strong field. But this is one where the pace projector actually identifies this as being a race they predict will have a fast pace. And it's one of those times where I'm going to disagree with basically what's my own creation. I think in this case, it's largely a factor of it being a big field, which is leading to that. We don't have any horses in the race even labeled as so much a speed or a leader. So I think it's going to be a more moderate pace, and I'm not just looking to bet closers due to that fast pace tag that you'll see.
Yeah, now that I'm looking at the running styles of the horses, I'm a little bit surprised that there's a fast pace predicted in this race, but that's sometimes how it works out. Mucho Gusto, if he runs back to the race he ran in the Travers, he'll be tough. Based on the discussion we had after the Travers, I'm assuming that we have a similar feeling about this, that Owendale might be the horse you want out of the Travers, because we talked about a lot that the rail was dead on Travers Day. And while almost the entire Travers field really avoided that path right down on the inside for the entirety of that race, the horse that was closest to that dreaded inside path was Owendale. He was really in the 2 to 3 path for most of his Travers trip. And that just wasn't where you wanted to be that day. He actually finished up okay, all things considered. He obviously handles the mile and an eighth distance. And that Ohio Derby was certainly flattered by Math Wizard last weekend. So I just think Owendale makes a lot of sense in this race, and I'm hoping he doesn't have to come from too far back, because he does have the tactical speed to sit a little bit closer to the pace.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with Owendale, but I'm actually leaning towards Tax here. I know he wasn't near the bad rail last time, but I still think he had a bit of a tough trip. It was definitely an above average pace in the Travers. He lost a pretty good amount of ground around both turns. I'm not sure he really wants the whole mile and a quarter. And I think he's going to have really good position in here. I think he's going to get good up close position. I don't think you want to be coming from too far back at Remington, which is part of why I'm skeptical of Owendale in here. And I just think he is probably the horse to beat. I think Owendale might get caught wide. Not Owendale. I think Mucho Gusto might get caught going a little wide with a bunched up piece in here. So I'm just looking for a little bit of a price with Tax. I doubt anybody's going to win this race other than the three that we've talked about in here, but Tax will be my top selection.
I've got no problem with him. I agree with you about the distance. I think getting back to a mile and an eighth is probably going to help Tax a little bit. I didn't love his Travers performance, but I didn't think he ran badly in that race by any means, and his Jim Dandy certainly was good. So I agree with you. I think one of these horses will probably win, and I would imagine Mucho Gusto is going to be the favorite by a substantial margin over the other two. We'll see how much money Owendale takes, so you might get some value on Tax even. I love the New York breds. I don't quite see them stacking up against this group. Funny Guy and Bankett, who you mentioned. I didn't think the Albany was that strong of a race. So I would kind of take a stand against those two. And I agree with you. I would use Owendale just over Mucho Gusto and Tax.
And as you mentioned, the two New York breds, I mean, maybe if the race fell apart, you could like bank it. The third place finisher in that race did come back to win at Belmont today at a short price while we were recording this, actually. But yeah, I'm not so high on those two. One interesting note about the pace, long range Toddy's actually predicted on the pace projector to be in front. And he's actually a horse we don't even have listed as a tracker. So that's why I'm really skeptical of that fast pace tag in this one. Again, I think it's mostly because of field size, and I think it's going to hurt the outside post. Outside post can usually find some position when the pace is quick early, but I'm not sure we're going to get it here. So I think we're going to see some of those horses losing some lengths, and I think that's where it's going to help Tax. But I do agree with you. Owendale's Travers better than it looks, and I'm looking forward to a really fun race on Saturday. awake that late. I don't think it goes off till almost 9 o'clock here. They'll probably run a little bit behind schedule. I know they're trying to take the spotlight and be the only thing really going that time of day. So it's a good thing for Remington Park and should be a fun evening for me.
I hope you have a good time out there on Sunday. That'll be fun to watch and an interesting race to analyze afterwards. And we didn't talk about them, but we'll talk about all these races next week on Tuesday, including the races we skipped at Belmont, like Imperial Hint, who's running in the Vosburg, and Midnight Busu, who's running in the Beldame, as well as McKinsey. Those will be the main races to talk about afterwards, because those are the most significant prep races for the Breeders' Cup. Just they're not that interesting from a handicapping perspective. So you can catch that show on the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday. But for now, that's all the racing we've got to cover on this Friday episode. As always, you can listen to us on direct.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or SoundCloud. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form and listen to the TimeformUS Forecast on Fridays, our new shows, and the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday. So we'll see you again on Tuesday and recap these races. Thanks for listening, guys.